Thank you for joining us today. My name is Patricia Allendick, and I'm with the National Coalition to End Urban Indigenous Homelessness and Chief Seattle Club. I am very excited to begin this panel and really thankful for all of you for attending. So we will begin with Roger Fernandez, with storytelling from the Northwest.
Hatning Siam. That means thank you, good people. My name is Roger Fernandez. I'm from the lower Elwha Clallam people of Western Washington, the Olympic Peninsula. Our real name is Nuxclayam, which means strong people, but the English speakers call us Clallam. And so I'm going to share a story with you. I want to preface the story with one quick statement that in the old days, if you had a problem in your life, a struggle in your life, and you couldn't figure it out, you would go talk to the old people in your village, the elders. You would talk to them because they hold wisdom and knowledge, and they would listen to your problem, whatever it is. If you had a problem with your work or your children or your neighbor, whatever it was, they'd listen to you. And when you were done explaining your problem, the elders would usually say, "Let me tell you a story." And then they would tell you a story that had nothing to do with your problem, because you're talking about a problem with you and your neighbor, and they're telling you about a chipmunk and a grizzly bear. And so what they were doing was trying to help you find your answer that you held within you. The elders believed you knew the answer already to your problem, but you needed help to find it. So when I tell a story, sometimes it doesn't literally talk about, like this topic today, homelessness. But homelessness is a symptom of something else. And so maybe this story talks about that something else. And so again, I tell a story that I'm hoping is going to reinforce the title of this workshop, called Pushing Up the Sky. And there is a native story called Pushing Up the Sky that comes from this area. The best known of them is the Snoqualmie story. So I'm going to share that Snoqualmie story with you. Again, I'm telling you this story because within this story might be something called wisdom that we might turn to as we use our brain and our heart and our spirit to try to find the answer to these problems that we're confronted with today. So I'm going to tell you this story called Pushing Up the Sky. A long time ago, the world was very different than it is today. The one who made the world, the changer, left the sky very low. It was so low that the people could not walk standing up. They had to bend over all the time to walk. The sky was right above them, right, making them bend over, and their backs began to hurt, and they couldn't see where they were going, and they couldn't solve this problem. What can we do about this heavy sky that's upon us? A little girl thought that she could find an answer, and so she thought, and she thought, and she thought, and she had an idea. She walked out of her home to the middle of the village. The sky was right above her. She put her hands to the sky, and she pushed up as hard as she could, and she felt the sky move a tiny bit. She said, "I'll ask the other people to help me." And she called them out, told them her idea, but they were grumpy. That's crazy. That'll never work," they said. But she begged, "Please try." So they all tried, put their hands in the sky. They pushed up as hard as they could, and they felt it move a little bit more. Now, this was a very smart little girl. She said, "If we invite all the tribes around here, the tribes that come from our land here, the Muckleshoot, the Suquamish, the Tulalip, the Snohomish, we invite them all to our village, and we push upon the sky together. Maybe we can push the sky up, push it out of our way, push it to where it belongs." And the people said, "Little girl, that's a good idea." So all the tribes are called to that Snoqualmie village up in the mountains. And the plan was explained how we're going to push up the sky, to push it where it belongs. But someone in the back said, "Well, that's a good idea, but there's a big problem, because we all speak different languages here. We all have a different word for push. So how can we work together? We all have different languages." They talked and thought and argued. They couldn't think of the solution. And as I said before, they decided to go to an elder, the old man of the village. And he went and listened to them. And he said, "Let me think about it for 4 days. Come back in 4 days and I will tell you." So they came back in 4 days. The old man said, "You shall use the word Yahau. Yahau will mean work together. Yahau will mean push together. When I say Yahau, we all say Yahau and push up on that heavy sky." And so everyone put their hands in the sky. And the old man yelled, "Yahau!" And everyone responded, "Yahau!" And they pushed up together and they felt it move. He said again, "Yahau!" They pushed up again, "Yahau!" He said it again, "Yahau!" They repeated, "Yahau!" pushing up on the sky. Then he said, "We need big long poles. We need to keep pushing it up." So they got big poles and they pushed them up. "Yahau!" pushing up the sky. "Yahau!" pushing up the sky again. "Yahau!" And so we did it. We pushed this guy up to where it is today. The Snoqualmie people say, if we work together, we can do great things. We can even push up the sky. We can do the impossible. And so that is all the story called Pushing Up the Sky. It comes from this area here. It talks about working together. And I'm going to, because of the short time here, I'm just going to say that I've told this story for about 30 or 40 years. I never get tired of telling it, because within this story is wisdom. How do we work together? It's easy to say we're going to work together, but sometimes there are challenges because we're all different people. How do we find the common philosophy, idea, belief that's going to always be the thing that connects us? A lot of other things might differ, but what is the one thing that holds us together as we do this work together? And so again, this story you might notice starts with a little girl, a young woman, a young girl having an idea, and then an old person implementing all of that to make it work. So we need our young people, our adults, our elders all working together. So again, I don't mean to lecture you, because that's not the job of a storyteller, but I wanted you to know that when you hear the word pushing up the sky, we can do great things if we work together. We can even push up the sky. We can do the impossible. So again, this is what our stories give us, the chance to see a situation from a whole different perspective, to see it, I guess you call it reframing now, to see it in a different light. And in that different light, we might see things differently. We might come up with some answers that we never thought of before. So again, I put my hands up to Chief Seattle Club for the good work that they do, to the staff there, Colleen and all her staff, and Patty, for all the good work you guys are doing. I put my hands up to you. And again, as an artist and storyteller, there's ways I can help you. Please let me know. Thank you for letting me share this story. Katning Siam. Thank you, good people.
Thank you, Roger. We're so honored that you would join us today. And we just want to welcome everyone from all around the country who is joining us on the webinar. Patricia introduced herself earlier, but I'll introduce myself. My name is Colleen Echohawk. I'm an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. I also belong to the Upper Athabascan people of rural Alaska. I was one of the founders of this coalition, and then I also now am I'm an executive director at the Chief Seattle Club. We wanted just to begin this time together by also thanking the National Alliance on Ending Homelessness to End Homelessness. Chandra Crawford and her whole team over there, you guys have been amazing, really pushing forward rights and equity as one of the ways that we will solve homelessness. And I want to connect Roger's story to the work that we're doing, because this work can sometimes feel really hard. It can sometimes feel impossible, but together with all communities represented, we can do the impossible. We can push up the sky. We can lift up our relatives who have been experiencing homelessness. You know, one of the greatest travesties of our country was the forced removal of Native people from our homelands. And that was the first homelessness that happened here in this country. And with what's going on in our country now, with this focus on justice for folks who have been really left behind, who have been marginalized, who have been brutalized, it is time for Black and Indigenous and POC folks to have a voice. And I want to thank the National Alliance for giving us this time today. I don't want to take up too much time because we have some amazing people who are going to share what has been happening around the country and how they are supporting our folks who are experiencing homelessness. But I want to thank you guys for jumping up and doing this with us. We're looking forward to a really robust conversation. For those who are listening, I also want to remind you that this isn't an Indigenous way to do a webinar. It might be a little different than you have experienced in the past. We believe that we should, part of the way we will solve homelessness is to do it through culture and through Indigenous knowledge. So just thank you for your patience on that. And thank you for having cultural humility as we come into this time together. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Patricia, who will be moderating our panels today.
Yes, Ganeshish. And I also forgot to mention I am enrolled in the Tlingit and Haida tribes of Southeast Alaska, as well as have relations of being a descendant of a Mohawk, and as well as Caribbean and Arawak, and especially a Taína descendancy. So moving forward, I wanted to introduce Mindy with the National Alliance to End Homelessness, share a little bit of a background of the organization.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Patricia. I'm Mindy Mitchell, a senior technical assistant here at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I'll just be supporting today's webinar, which is, of course, led by the National Coalition to End Urban Indigenous Homelessness. Just have a few housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar is being recorded, and all registrants for the webinar will receive an email with an accompanying link to the recording, the slides, additional resources within 24 hours of the broadcast. We do have all attendees on mute, and that will remain so throughout the broadcast. The video function has also been turned off for attendees, and the Zoom chat function is disabled. But if you have questions, please enter them into the Zoom Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen. The questions are going to be held until after the presentation is complete. But then there's time at the end for panelists to answer questions. Any questions that we don't get today will be gathered together by us at the Alliance and passed on to Colleen and her staff so that we can get all those answered for you. Also wanted to just let you know that you can access the entire COVID-19 webinar series on our website. We have an upcoming webinar in a couple of weeks on diversion, a really important strategy, especially for ending homelessness in times of pandemic. And finally, you can all join the Ending Homelessness Forum, which is a resource that the Alliance created for communities across the country to share what's going on with them during the coronavirus pandemic, best practices, emerging promising practices, and a way for you all to talk to each other to confront common challenges. So now we'll get started, and I'll turn it back over to Patricia and start the conversation.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we don't have Cree here today representing the Navajo and Dene nations, but that also will give us some more time, and we'll definitely be following up with him as well. That will give us a little bit more time to do the introduction of the panelists. We'll have 5 minutes each. And first off, I definitely wanted to introduce somebody who's amazing at everything I've seen her do in a lot of her work, Andrea Garcia from the Los Angeles City and County Native American Indian Commission. So we asked that our panelists introduce themselves so that they could be able to have that full time of sharing what their experiences and what work they've been doing within their areas and regions. Thank you, Andrea.
Hey, thanks for having me. I am super excited that this webinar is taking place and that the coalition is kicking off. So thank you to you and Colleen, Patricia. So my name is Andrea Garcia. On my maternal side, I am Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara from the Fort Worth Reservation in North Dakota. And on my paternal side, I'm Mexican. I myself was born and raised in Los Angeles and still have the privilege of being connected to my family back home. By training, I am a physician, I'm a researcher, and I currently work at the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, which also supports me in this work in addressing homelessness within our Native American community. As Patricia mentioned, I also am a commissioner appointed by our mayor for the Los Angeles City County Native American Commission. So that's a lot of lots of word soup there, but essentially my role, as I see it, particularly in homelessness in the community, is to sort of bouncing off Roger's story, is to be that person in the story who's trying to gather community to lift up the sky. So in Los Angeles County, we at the moment don't yet have the infrastructure that we see our colleagues having in other big urban spaces. And so in that sense, I'm super appreciative to be on the webinar with our other colleagues on the call. We would like to someday soon have culturally sensitive housing for our community. We would like to have stronger relationships with our local continuum of care, and that is actively happening, so we're appreciative of that. But mostly we're starting from ground zero here in Los Angeles. We're working with the system to try to uplift the fact that our community is probably not counted as much as we need it to be, and probably not defined actually not defined the way that we ourselves identify as American Indians, Alaska Natives, particularly those of us who live in urban communities. And so again, like we're at the beginning of this journey, but we are making steps towards making a difference for our community, with our community. And then we'll probably get more into it later, so I'll stop there. But we're super excited to be part of this work, and are ever grateful for all of the wisdom that we'll hear from our other speakers on the call. Thank you.
Ashish, thank you. Up next, I wanted to introduce Patina Park, who's the Director of Tribal State Relations Systems Implementation in Minnesota. So please give a warm welcome for Patina.
Hello, everyone. Jawashe Matakawape, Shante Washe, Nepakachi, Yuzapo. I greet you all with an open heart, and I greet you all as my relatives. My name is Patina Park. I'm Minkaju Lakota. My birth family comes from Cheyenne River, and I always articulate that because I was taken away from my family at birth during the adoption sweeps, and as such, I was raised by an Oklahoma family who were Osage and happened to be in North Dakota, and the adoption agency thought they were white. You know, sorry, of course I should turn my phone up. So having that kind of experience, you know, challenges kind of who you feel, like how I feel. So I'm always humbled to be in these groups and these conversations, and also really honored that my friend reached out and asked. I currently have been in this role just for a few months. I started in March. Prior to that, I ran nonprofits here in the Twin Cities, Minnesota Indian Resource Center for 6 years, as well as the Division of Indian Work for a little over a year. Both agencies focused a lot on providing wraparound, holistic, trauma-based programming for our community members, our relatives, many who experienced the federal relocation through their family and are in the urban areas with not a lot of connections to a lot of the tribal communities. Some go back and forth quite frequently, but the Twin Cities has one of the most concentrated populations of Native people. We're not in the top 5 for numbers. We're less than 1% of the overall state population. But a lot of us are concentrated in the South Minneapolis area. Also because Little Earth Housing Development, which is the last concentrated housing program through HUD, and this one is Native specific, it's the last one remaining in the country. And so that has also kind of skewed the numbers because of all the families that are living in that very concentrated area. About almost 2 years ago, a homeless encampment popped up here in the Twin Cities for the first time at that level, called the Franklin Hiawatha Encampment, also called the Wall of Forgotten Natives, because Native Americans in the state of Minnesota are 27 times more likely to be homeless than white people, which are the measurement. The next worst group is our African American, our Black families, who are 6 times more likely. So there's a huge disparity in the housing issue. And a lot of it is, like has already been commented on, the difficulty in finding low-income housing that is supportive, recognizing that many of our families have a multi-generational effect to their housing. And so we're not just working with a single family, we're working with grandma and mom and the kids who've gone in and out of various housing programs. The other thing I want to share is that from my perspective, when I look at working with our community and our relatives, is that they are our relatives, that they're not those people or that problem, which I sometimes hear in conversations with more dominant culture, but to truly see them as our relatives both makes the work very hard and deeply personal, but also connects you to the work in a way that I think others who don't view each other as relatives, they miss that kind of element. And so it can be hard work, but it can also be really rewarding work. And even in places where dominant culture may see dysfunction, in like an encampment, you know, I see beauty and I see people coming together and supporting each other and showing that those who have the less usually are the most giving. And the way to harness that in a positive way to create differentiated housing responses is really what I've focused my work on, and now at the state level. And I just want to highlight briefly here too that I can't go without speaking of the George Floyd incident here in Minneapolis just a few weeks ago, that had a huge impact also in our encampments in our homeless community because it was shown very early that a lot of the outside instigators were hiding in the camps during the day. So a remarkable multi-jurisdictional and volunteer organizational group came together to move people out of the camps, and then state funding to help support them in hotels. So that horrible event really did trigger a new response and a fast response for our homeless community. So I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation and the other guests. So thank you.
Wow, that was amazing update. So thank you very much. Moving forward, I wanted to introduce Summer. Summer Keli'i Peo. Summer is the Director of Strategic Planning for the Lili'ua Kalani Trust in Hawaii. And so I hope I pronounced things correctly, but please forgive me. I am still learning. So I'm very excited that we're able to have you here, Summer, and for you to be able to share what's going on within your Indigenous community and in your region.
Mahalo, mahalo. Aloha kako o Summer ku aloha Keli'i Peo ko ui no piha no kane o he oahu mai au no mokupuni o Hawaii. Aloha, I'm Summer Keli'i Peo from Kane'ohe Oahu, the archipelago of Hawaii that stretches from Kane Miloha'i in the northwest to our baby Lo'ihi Seamount, 3,000 feet still below the surface of the ocean. My aloha to you and your kupuna from me and my kupuna. May they reach out across time, space, and fiber optic network to touch each other and bless all of us with aloha. Mahalo nui to the organizers of today's presentation, the Coalition to End Urban Indigenous Homelessness and the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all in this space. I work for Lili'ua Kalani Trust, an organization founded in 1909 by Hawaii's last queen to care for and educate orphan and destitute Native Hawaiian children. I send my aloha to all of our service providers across the state on this call or doing their good work, and I'm sure they send their aloha to you all too. I think it's important to start first with some context because our histories aren't well known beyond our communities, and so I think it's important. Lots of folks don't know much about Hawaii beyond, sort of tourism and the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. So the earliest archaeological evidence of human settlement in Hawaii dates back to 124 AD. Though many others try to push settlement much later, and you all know why. Since 124 AD or before, Hawaiians created a thriving society with abundant food systems, incredible art, and a complex social structure. And then came contact with Europeans and Americans after 1778. We had a constitutional monarchy in the 19th century until our queen was illegally overthrown on January 17th, 1893. The population of Hawaiians declined somewhere around 90% in the 1800s, fueled by the usual suspects: disease, dispossession of land, loss of structures that provide Hawaiians with security, sustenance, and meaningful vocation, and all the terrible aspects of colonization: alcoholism, mental health issues, physical violence, and loss of identity. The cultural and historical trauma faced by our Native Hawaiian homeless family is the same cultural and historical trauma faced by their ancestors post-contact. To uncover the path forward with our family means unraveling the hihia, the knotted ball of injustices, pain, grief, separation, loss, and despair that goes all the way back to contact. We use many metaphors and stories, mo'olelo, mahalo nui for the mo'olelo provided on this call today, and I'd like to share one proverb with you today. It's mo'hala I kawai, kamaka o kapua, Unfolded by the waters are the faces of the flowers, and flowers bloom where there is water. Metaphorically, Hawaiians use pua, or flowers, to symbolize people, particularly children. The imagery helps to remind us that people bloom only when the conditions are right, when they are nourished and supported, and when the environment around them is good. When a plant doesn't bloom or it doesn't grow, we don't blame the plant and say this plant is no good. It won't take personal responsibility for its actions. We say, oh no, what did I do wrong? Did I not water it enough? Did I water it too much? Is there too much sunlight or too little sunlight? What conditions weren't right that this plant couldn't grow? So when we think about healing the cultural and historical trauma, we have to think about what it will take in terms of conditions to help our people, our precious flowers, to grow. Because it's not necessarily them per se, as much as it is the conditions in which they live. I look forward to hearing from what everybody else has to say on this call and answering your questions as well. I know that our service providers out there in the community, we've been working really hard together and doing an incredible job of supporting our people, and yet it always feels like not enough. And I want us to remember that this is a big ball of wax. This is a big ball of knots and entanglements and ensnarements. And in order to get to untangling those ensnarements, we have to address each knot and each entanglement that pulled us into this big ball of trouble that we're in. And freeing ourselves really is about untangling that knot. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here today. Mahalo nui.
Mahalo. Summer, keli'i pio. Keli'i pio. Yes, okay. Wanted to get it down. Thank you so much, everyone, for your introductions. And I know sometimes it's not always easy to introduce yourself, but I wanted really to hold that space to uplift all of you in your work. We, as a team with the coalition, we have been working on some questions to ask the panel. And also I encourage our audience, our participants, to make sure to write some questions if you have any as things go along, and we'll make sure to, if we can't address the question right now during the panel, we'll make sure to address it following up with you all later on. And so the first question we have is for Andrea. The question is, what have been your best or most effective practices in your position during COVID-19 coronavirus?
Yeah. So again, I really think it's falling back to Roger's first story, and it has been gathering our community and working together. So just a little more background. So again, I mentioned I'm a physician with our County Department of Mental Health and sit in the commission. On both sides, but particularly through the commission, when COVID happened, we were asking ourselves, like, we need to do something. We need to do something. What is it? So our very first step was we decided that we needed to have a webinar. We just needed to talk to our community as providers, as healthcare providers, translate whatever messaging that was needed to just get out there in front of our community and talk. Right? That's what we do. We also decided that it was really important to have our numerous community-based organizations on that call to let them explain, like, what are the changes in services, like what additional resources can we offer? And so that's how this effort started, by reaching out to the community and pulling them in. That initial group that joined our webinar said, hey, like, we really like this this gathering. Like, we don't really have a forum too often to do it. Like, can we continue to meet? And we're like, yeah. So we decided to to have weekly meetings, which then turned into meetings every other week. And that body, again, it's a lot of directors, executive directors of our many community-based organizations that serve Native people. So we've been regularly meeting, and some of the things that we've been doing on the calls have definitely been sharing resources and information with each other. Just because we all serve Native people doesn't mean that we all know what each other's doing, right? We have been very intentional in doing some targeted outreach. So our group came together as a collective and raised the funds in order to make a COVID PSA for our community. Because we often see that in general, in media, even working with the larger institutions, that we're oftentimes forgotten about, that people aren't intentional in sort of lifting up our stories, our faces, our messaging, and sort of focusing in on what would gain people's attention the most. So we all raised money to have a beautiful PSA shot. We just finished filming it this weekend, Sunday actually, and we're anticipating that will come out very soon. But the maker of this particular PSA is a creative genius, so we're excited to see that come out. And that body came together and said, this is important for us, so we're going to put our money where our values are. Additionally, as reports come out through the county, we have shared that data back with the group and have been like, hey, like, what do you think of these numbers? And because people are on the ground, so to speak, right, they're able to say, yeah, like, that's not really reflective, like, this data is, you know, whatever. And then we can bring it back to the county in my position, right? And as a commission as well, and be like, this is what our community is saying. And so we've had that opportunity to go back to our community regularly during this crisis. The other really big wins that have come out of that group is, again, aside from sharing resources, we've been able to connect our community with partners such as Baby to Baby, such as our Workforce Development, Aging and Community Services Department, so that we have been getting food deliveries, pickups every week since this started. And I would say it's probably an underestimate at this point, but we so far have been able to deliver or distribute 7,000 pounds of dry goods to our community, produce, dairy, much needed diapers, feminine hygiene products, and other hygiene products. Again, because we've already built this infrastructure of how we communicate with each other. We also, as a whole, have been vetting fact sheets that go out, county messaging, and again, really trying to integrate and center our community's voices and input within the structures that we are able to work with and able to touch. So again, none of this would have been possible unless we brought our communities together. And I think we're really seeing the tangible benefits from it as a result. And yeah, again, we are attempting to touch the sky together, and it's so far been good for us.
That is so awesome, Andrea. And you know, one thing I was seeing when you were talking is that one of the kind of consequences, or one thing we're dealing with COVID-19 in our homeless Native community, is that a lot of our folks have a generational historical trauma around pandemics. And so we have found at the Chief Seattle Club that early on, especially, people were just kind of ignoring it. They were in their trauma, they couldn't handle it. They already had all their ongoing trauma with their, you know, experiencing homelessness. So having those very specific cultural connections, that cultural media, all of that is just so incredibly important, and you're just killing it out there in LA as usual. So we're so glad to have that perspective here today.
Yes, thank you so much. And we have a question for Summer. So for Summer, tell us your experience leading responses during COVID-19 as an Indigenous person.
Sure. Yeah, leadership. Things have gotten really stressful, or additionally stressful in the last few months. And I think a lot of us are yearning for leadership, and maybe in the right places and maybe in the wrong places too. So just like Andrea was talking about, lifting up the sky for sure is part of it. We have to do things together. We have to get better at doing things together. I was listening to something and someone had said, you know, this might be the first time actually where the entire globe is facing a collective crisis. As Indigenous people, we have faced epidemic after epidemic after epidemic for hundreds of years. And this actually might be the first time that other folks are in this epidemic with us. And it gives us an opportunity to talk about our ongoing struggle with modernization and being a part of modern society and modern culture that others may not have been able to understand until now. And so leading responses in this crisis has been an interesting balance between doing and being for us. And so I like to talk to my staff a lot. A lot of what the work needs to do and the way they need to lead is they got to put their boots on and get their shovel out and go to work. Because there is no time to be idle in this time. At the same time, of course, we're all seeing the same stress. And we're all experiencing our historical trauma, and those wounds are coming back up. And we're seeing our clients facing those traumas too, and we're receiving their trauma too, and experiencing our own secondary and tertiary trauma as well. And so for sure, there's so much stress that you have to balance the doing with the being, and find the space to what we call pule, or meditate or pray, and find a space and a time for you to just be quiet and to connect with the things and the people and the spirit around you, or these pandemics will overwhelm you. I think is what we've learned in a couple hundred years as Indigenous people, that in our DNA is the strength to survive, and the possibility to thrive. But we can't do that if we're going absolutely nuts. And so we do have to take some time to center. We have to take our time to have deep breaths, remember who we are and where we came from and what connects all of us, so that there can also be peace also in all of this chaos. So I think in leading responses, there has to be a really great balance, what we call pono, not too much, not too little, but just right. Balance between doing and being, and so that's what I've learned in leading in this crisis.
Thank you, Summer. Mahalo.
Summer, that was amazing. You just gave me all kinds of goosebumps. You know, and I think that our Hawaiian Indigenous community, I think we tend to kind of forget over here on the mainland. And I know that you guys are doing such incredible work to support so many folks, so many Native Hawaiians who are experiencing homelessness. So huge mahalos for your work.
Yes, thank you. And our next panel question we have again for Andrea. What are your struggles? What are the struggles of some of your unsheltered communities, and or communities living in encampments? What are they facing during COVID-19?
Yeah, so I would say, again, prefacing it with, at the moment, we don't have like a Chief Seattle Club, for instance. Like, we don't have intentional day shelters for our relatives that are homeless. And so I think that sort of sets the context for how hard it is. We have a number of community-based organizations that regularly serve and interact with our unsheltered relatives. But because of COVID, you know, those community spaces, like literal spaces, community spaces that served as areas for them to get warm meals, to hang out in, just to be with each other, have not been open physically. And so that in and of itself is a struggle. And some of our providers have mentioned that even though we can serve meals from the door, from an open space, it's just not the same. They can't hang out. And so some of those warm meals have in turn turned into bagged lunches. And essentially what our providers are telling us is that they're not seeing as many of those folks. And so they've been really intentional about reaching out to them via phone. And they're still around, but I would say, just from the cultural aspect of like having done a number of key informant interviews, the one thing that I heard from our relatives experiencing homelessness is that community has been so important for them. It's no surprise that some of those same community members stay outside of our organizations because they want to feel safe, right? And so that's, from the provider perspective, I would say that has been the most difficult, is just not knowing where they're at. The other thing that we are really worried about is in LA County, we had this program called Project Room Key. Basically, Project Room Key was prioritizing those who were at highest risk for COVID and getting them into hotels, which essentially converted to temporary shelters immediately, as soon as possible. And so, as we all know, our community unfortunately has a lot of those risk factors. And our worry from the very get-go was that because we don't have the infrastructure in place, because we don't have that rapid rehousing, whatnot, because we're not connected systematically to the coordinated entry system, we were very afraid that our people wouldn't be reached, because if we wanted to be reached, it would be a lot easier, but some people don't, right? And so we raised that concern very early on and really tried to work with the system to be like, hey, like, can you send someone to our organizations to just enroll people right away? And the early numbers, I believe we got 2 weeks ago, maybe 60 natives were enrolled in Project Room Key, which is great. But just to give you some context, in LA County, we have the largest population of Native Americans in the country, okay? Our last estimate 5 years ago was about 170,000 Native Americans living in LA County. If you add how high risk we are in terms of our diabetes rate, in terms of just age, all of the other risk factors, pulmonary problems, etc., we should be having much higher numbers of that. One study that we did showed that 14% of our community was homeless. This is just on a small research study that we did. So we should have a lot more than 60 people in those Project Room Key shelters. And I think that's been the most frustrating part, because again, we're taking the steps to connect to the system, but it's not as fast as we would like, because we know our relatives are out there and we know that they need the support.
Yeah.
So that,
and when I'm hearing you, Andrea, one thing I want to like, just for everyone on this call today is like, if you know that you have Native people who are experiencing homelessness in your system, in your organization, please be reaching out to the Native organizations and finding ways to connect culturally, finding ways to fund them. You know, it is common around the country for our Native organizations to not be connected to the continuum of care, to not be connected, coordinated for entry, for all of these systems where all the dollars are at. We are not connected to them. And so it's really helpful to have our allies and our co-conspirators to be reaching out to us and saying, here, we want to connect you with this, like bring, and that way we can, you know, serve, the whole system is better if we get that done. And that's what I hear you doing so wonderfully out there in LA.
yeah.
Thank you. And for next question, we wanted to ask Patina to share a story of Indigenous resilience from your community in addressing solutions to COVID-19.
Okay, I'm going to first ask if you can hear me better now, because there was a lot of static before.
Still a little staticky.
Then I'm going to turn the camera off and see if that's better. Let's give it a try. Any better?
A little.
Well, okay, I will speak a little slower and a little louder, perhaps. The story I want to tell is that the COVID crisis is directly contributed to the George Floyd incident. The story that the COVID is an equalizer is not true for those of us who have been working in communities that are more impacted, because we were already way behind everyone else. And so the amount of simmering that was going on with the loss of jobs and the loss of support and the unknowns and the fear really created a boiling pot that boiled over. But in those times of crisis, when we had multiple nights of literally being under attack by outside agitators that we're seeing now, are very coordinated, very efficient ways of creating chaos, that our Indigenous community came together and protected their buildings, their community that were living, the families. And overnight, up to 300 people came in from the cities and from the surrounding tribes, many who were at Standing Rock, and stood guard. As a result, none of the properties, except one, had any damage that created an environment where they couldn't open. So the grocery store, the Aldi's, still open in the Native community, the corner stores. And it wasn't just our property, because, you know, relative is all of us. So they also protected the surrounding buildings. And there's a restaurant that is a South American food that opened when all the others were closed, to provide food for people who were out there. So the way everyone came together and did what was natural, which was to support and to help each other out, and for everyone to use their strengths, what they could do to contribute to the collective whole, is just a message and a story I keep reminding myself that we're all parts of a collective whole, and that we each have to do the very best we can with what our skills and talents we've been given, and to trust that people elsewhere and other places are doing the same thing, so that we don't get overwhelmed, don't get stressed out, don't burn out. Because at the end of the day, I realized too that stressing out is ego. It's not actual care and compassion and love. It's me thinking I know how to do everything, and fighting against that ego is the only reason why all those very strong personalities were able to come together and protect the community. And it set a model for what community enforcement and community policing and community support looks like as the state starts to look at how do we reform our criminal justice system, right?
Bettina, that is so crazy beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that out here in Seattle, we were watching, and Michael Goes sent me a picture from Minneapolis, who also works in serving Native people experiencing homelessness. And a lot of the people out on the street who were protecting the streets were wearing the shirts that prior to 1492, there was no Native homelessness. And it just warmed my heart. And you guys are just doing such amazing work out there. Just huge thanks.
Thank you. And you also are going to have another question right now. So we want to transition to that. Bettina, what services or programs have been the most challenging to provide during COVID-19?
I would say all of them, right? Because congregate care is life-threatening for our communities, right? A shelter environment to bring people in from outside. You know, in this moment, living outside in tents is actually a safer environment as long as you have hygiene and basic care provided, than to cram everyone into spaces where you can't social distance and people aren't consistently wearing masks. And even with all that protection, it's not enough. And so, you know, really the hardest thing is shifting other people's mindsets around what works, especially systems, to see that no, maybe in this moment, we need to look at things differently and be responsive to what the community needs instead of what everyone thinks they need, which is probably one of the biggest struggles I've had all along from the beginning, is countering the message from people who think they know best, who aren't from the community or know really anything about us to be making that decision.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely knowing the message of the story in the community will give the answers that a lot of us are looking for in terms of what roles, and everybody having a role in a lot of this work, and that no roles are more important or no responsibilities are more important than another. Thank you for sharing that. And so we'll be closing off with our last panel question. This will be for Summer. What traditional practices and knowledges have been incorporated in your work, and why is it important to practice these?
Yeah, it's really great. I feel like the why is pretty obvious. Our practices and our knowledge works. We've shown for thousands of years that we can thrive on these systems, and that the sort of deeper understanding of the universe and how we fit in the universe is actually how we get to prosperity as humanity. And so that's why the practices are so important. And if it's okay, I'm going to share a little bit. Somebody asked about resources in the question box, but this is Nanaike Kumo. It's a really important piece of work that we use here in Hawaii as Native Hawaiians. It provides a lot of different resources and tools and understandings of concepts. And so one of the concepts I'd like to read for you really quickly is called hihia. And this particular concept fits into a larger practice called ho'oponopono, which is about setting right. It's about creating justice, apologizing, I guess reconciliation, it would be the English terminology, but it feels right to bring this particular practice to light, given what's happened in the last few weeks with the death and murder of George Floyd. So hihia is entanglement or entangled, snarl or snarled or enmeshed. Hihia is a rare verbal gem, one word that carries whole pages of meanings. As hala is visualized as a cord that binds culprit, offense, and victim, so hihia is viewed as a larger yet tighter network of many cords tied in numerous stubborn knots. Hihia is an entanglement of emotions and actions and reactions, all with negative and troublesome connotations. Hihia may begin with two people, as for example, when one wrongs another. Both react emotionally, direct feelings at each other, and absorb feelings inwardly. Action follows, whether it be tangible lawsuit, divorce, violence, or erecting a barrier of silence. Emotions, actions, and counter-emotions and counter-actions spread to the family and close associates. Soon, everyone concerned is entangled in a network of resentment, hostility, guilt, depression, or vague discomfort. Cause sparks effect, effect brings about cause. The net tightens, yet expands at the same time. Even the innocent bystander is a part of hihia. A child witnessing a parental quarrel is involved in hihia, though he may not have caused the quarrel, yet he senses the anger, feels insecurity, and sooner or later will feed back into the entanglement his own reactions and responses. Hawaiians sense that in hihia, one who inflicted a wrong on another suffers and is wronged by his own hostile feelings. The one who is wronged also suffers and is harmed by the grudge cherished, the self-pity nursed, as much as by the original wrong. Therefore, both, and usually an entire group of people, must find ways to kala or free themselves from this thicket of entangled emotions. The way was ho'oponopono, a family conclave for setting things to right. In this, both concept and ritual of mihi or forgiveness and restitution is how we begin to untangle the ensnarlments that bind us together and yet make life incredibly miserable for all of us, right? So we bring up things like hihia when we work with our kids and our families, because it reminds us that even small interactions, as well as systemic interactions, loop us all together and continue to hurt and cause additional hurt and misunderstanding and pain. And if we don't understand the hihia that we've all been woven into, it's really hard to untangle them. Yeah. And so we sit down quietly and one by one begin to pick apart the injustices or the wrongs or the offenses that we've caused, and begin to make our pathway towards forgiveness. So thanks for letting me share that one practice.
And I wanted to know really quick if you could hold that book up, but it was kind of being covered by your background. There we go. Perfect. So Nana I.
I also posted in the question and answer the link to that book on the Hawaiian Electronic Library.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Yep,
Thank
it's
you.
available online.
You know, I saw a question in the chat and it made me, you know, your comment somewhere made me think about this, about, you know, we do have to like wrestle with the true reality of colonialism that has impacted Indigenous people and homelessness. And I don't have any amazing answers to that right now, but I do know, and you might help me out with this, Summer, but I believe that the motto of Hawaii is the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. Is that right? And actually I think righteousness is pono pono. And I think that there's really something there that Indigenous communities, we are connected to land. We are connected to so much of what it means to be Indigenous people is that land and that connection. And that's something that I want to lift up to all of us on this call, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. How do we get to that place of pono, of coming into good relationship with each other when we think about land? It's a huge question, but I don't think huge questions should be not brought up or thought about, because some of us are going to find ways forward and solutions. Do you want to talk about this?
Yes.
Patricia?
So very briefly, we're going to go over one of the questions because we didn't want to kind of interrupt, the flow that we were going through. This is Indigenous way. I wanted to share a question from an Indigenous person from Canada. They wanted to ask, and Colleen would also like to incorporate her thoughts as well. The question is, are there Native programs and ideas that you utilize in working with the homeless population that have proven successful? And so I don't know if Colleen wants to start.
I'll just real quickly, I can say that at the Chief Seattle Club and through the work that we've done here with the City of Seattle and King County, we have a rapid rehousing program that is focused on Native people. It is one of the most successful rapid rehousing programs in our region. And we see that the cultural piece, having a cultural place for people to come to, having Native case managers to help work with our folks brings so much comfort and ease. And we are finding that our folks are staying in that housing, are accessing the rapid rehousing, and are just doing incredibly well. So yes, there are very much proven successful programs out there that focus on Native populations. I don't know, other people on the panel, other questions, other answers?
1 minute, we have 1 minute, yeah.
I've also looked to Native American connections in the Phoenix area. Diana Yazzie there has a lot of great experience. I think they have around 500 units. I don't want to speak for them, but also like just another amazing program to look towards for best practices.
Huge, thank you. So wanted to spend this time really quickly to close things out, and also we will be checking over more questions, seeing how we can follow up with people as well, and following up with our panelists if they want to continue this conversation further offline. And so wanted to share with you all the Women's Warrior Song, and this is originally composed from Martina Pierre from Lillooet from British Columbia in response to the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Turtle Island, but we also wanted to acknowledge our women's warriors. So this is the Women's Warrior Song. Yakio, yakio, yakio. Yakio, 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 Thank you.
We are so honored that you all were with us today. I just want to say that not only is this a warrior song, women's warrior song for everyone out on the call, but especially want to offer it as a blessing to our champion at National Alliance, Chandra Crawford, who's just been so wonderful about reaching out and about saying, how do we hear, how do we see the Native community? And we're just so grateful for you, Chandra, for your advocacy and support. To all of you out there on the call, I just want to say that the way we will solve all homelessness is to solve for Native homelessness. Is to hear the Native community, to listen to Indigenous voices, to follow our leadership, because we know and are connected to the sorrow of this land and the sorrow of our homeless community, because we were the first ones. If you think as a systems thinker, you will understand that. And Native people, we get that, and we want to be here. We want to support you. We want to give gifts of our culture and our songs to you and our stories. So we hope that you really heard that today.
Yes, thank you very much. So with that, we'll close it out.
It's 1 o'clock.
Yeah.